Hello, and thank you very much for coming along again this evening. We're going to look this evening at the impact of the digital revolution on our understanding of the past. In many respects, people would argue that the digital revolution has in effect rendered history inoperable, unnecessary. Everything's instantaneous, from your digital phone to digital pictures to digital movies being sent around the world sort of instantaneously. And the argument is, well, on that level, what good does digitization do for our understanding of the past? The past is clearly irrelevant according to this kind of representation. Well, in fact, that's not true at all. And it's only with the digital revolution that we've actually been able to pose new kinds of questions about ourselves in the past, about others in the past, about all human activity that's now retrievable. And we want to look this evening a bit at this whole question of the impact of the understanding of history in the digital age. So we're looking in terms of not only new technologies, but the way that evokes new data, new insights, and poses new questions, considering it all as part of history in the digital age. Perhaps no more dramatically anywhere is this demonstrated as what has been possible through the study of digital equipment focused on the slave trade. Perhaps the most extensive project in the digital era on the slave trade has been organized and put together under a website that you can go out to and explore called voyages.org. It's really quite extraordinary, and it has rich material behind it. They've constructed, by they, I mean an international team of scholars from all over the world and all over the United States and the Americas have constructed a transatlantic slave trade database, which is really quite extraordinary. It wouldn't have been possible in the pre-digital age. Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. summarizes their achievement. It's pretty impressive. Take a look.
The slavevoyages.org website has now completed 10 years of successful operation, drawing on 4 decades of archival research on 5 continents, a revolution in computer processing costs, and with major funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Board. The site now offers access to details of more than 36,000 slave trading voyages between Africa and the New World, a further 11,400 voyages from one part of the Americas to another part of the Americas, and 92,000 Africans who were forced to make these voyages. The role of slave voyages as the basic reference tool for the slave trade to the Americas and now within the Americas is well established. Users can now analyze data, sample estimates of the slave trade, view videos, maps, and animations, consult research essays, contribute corrections to existing data, and add information on voyages that the editors don't even know about.
Well, this is quite extraordinary because all of that is made possible now through a publicly accessible website, underwritten in part by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, also the National Humanities grants that they received, as well as contributions from here at Harvard at the Du Bois International Research Center. Alex Borkuki is one of the associate professors that contributed to it from the University of California, the statistical and graphical analysis. Others from the Department of History and Rice University, Daniel Dominguez, assistant professor of education at Clemson University, and, in fact, people from all over the United States. including Jane Hooper for the Department of History at George Mason University. In fact, they incorporated well-known historians who've been working on the slave trade their entire lives until they retired. David Eltis, Professor Emeritus for the Department of History at Emory University, oversaw the project, and in fact, it's his inspiration that got a lot of it together to begin with. But it's now available to the world, hosted at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and from Emory University, they have hosted the website available to all, including creating modern maps that give information about the origins and destinations of specific slave trade voyages. It's tedious to watch it in every single instance, but it's important to get the sense of the data behind this. These are summary maps that indicate the volume coming out of different portions of Africa and going to different destinations in the Americas, but they're summary maps. It's much more dramatic to see the visualization from the get-go, as it were. From the middle of the 16th century, you can view individual slave voyages replicated on these maps and graphed down below in such a way that you can get a sense of where they're going to. It starts out in a way that doesn't look very dramatic. 1578, 1580, this is long before the 1620 Plymouth plantation in the United States, but you can see as the 1600s start up at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 30, the number of voyages, little specks across the Atlantic, increase. It's instructive to see what happens after 1620 as well. Take a look. The number and frequency and size of these ships increases all throughout the 17th century. Just when Harvard is organized in 1635, right up through the early colonial years, and we can take it right up in this kind of visualization right through the year 1776. In other words, the whole period under which America was an English colony, before it had declared and then won its independence, is in effect smack within the high points of this international slave trade. 1716, 1718, 1920, 21, 1721, that's when Bach composed the Brandenburg Concertos. This has resonance with Europe, but not the usual resonance that we think of. We're not thinking about the profits made in this trip and series of trips, financing some of the highest achievements in Western art. We haven't juxtaposed those things, and before the digital age, it was very difficult to do so. Now, with this new kind of information, it's more and more accessible. 1771, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, you can see that, in effect, this is the height of the slave trade right while we're declaring independence in 1776 from a European overlord, King George III. Well, does that stop the trade? No, on the contrary, the trade accelerates, and you can see this right through 1789, when we, as it were, win the Independence War, and the Atlantic trade takes on fully important dimensions, both to North America and South America. Well after, as it turns out, the official abolition of the trade focuses more, as you can see, toward Brazil and South America, to somewhat of an extent to the Caribbean, but it's principally towards Brazil and South America. Well, you can get the idea. This can be taken up right through the end of the 19th century when their illustrations stop, But you can look at this map here, or this graph down here, and get a sense of the proportions that went to different parts of the world. The Caribbean in general, enormous amount. Brazil follows in volume over the course of the whole slave trade. And down here, mainland North America. That's what's up here. It declared its independence from the English in 1776. And in terms of numerical value, it's not really very significant in reference to the amounts of slaves that went to both the Caribbean and Brazil. Well, this is fascinating new information, or I should say it's a new visualization of data that's been collected painstakingly by these international teams of scholars about destination and source of shipments across the Atlantic. These modern maps can represent the volumes, the relative and absolute quantities are important here. The relative numbers are given by the thickness, both of the source and of the destination. And details are now emerging about the trade to the Indian Ocean and to the Red Sea, across the Red Sea and across the Sahara itself. This is fascinating new material. Another kind of digitization impact of for the study of history has been through a project, in fact a whole organization, entitled Afroterra.org. You can get access to this, and as they call themselves, they're a cartographic free library. Now this is very important because while these maps of the slave trade are modern maps with statistical summaries on them, they don't give you a sense of the maps that were being used at the time. And this is what Afroterra has focused on and specialized in. It has amazing maps that they've collected over the years and digitized for public access. Important historical maps like those of the island of Goree in Senegal have been carefully preserved and digitized for scholarly study and public online access. This is the island viewed from Google Earth nowadays, but if you look back at the maps, historically, they're pretty interesting. First of all, they had to be done imaginatively because the balloon technology hadn't been developed at the time that they were drawing these maps. And thanks to the work at Afroterra, they've developed zooming technology with these maps, and they can be studied and compared over time and in detail. This is very important as a way to go at things. If you click on their catalog, you'll get to a listing of their maps, and you can search the catalog to get various dates of maps and start to compare them over time. And when you click on the small catalog version of the map, you get into a Zoomify technology that they've developed with great skill for this new kind of research that's possible because of the digital age. When you see the map like this, you can actually zoom into it at greater and greater detail and look at what's on the ground. This becomes very, very fascinating because unless you had this map in your own collection, as a scholar, you couldn't tell much of it at a distance. A picture of it, a summary picture of it, doesn't give you much detail. But the more you zoom in, imaginatively, the more you parachute into the scene, the more you can see is indicated on here. And it's very fascinating when you look at these old maps for the data that they're encapsulating and storing and handing on from one user to the next. Take a look, for example, at the projected fortifications. These are retrenchments that are intended. They haven't yet occurred, but they are intended. There is a fort, and there are given indications on different rooms and buildings within the walls of the fort, or what they're for, and you can study that with reference to the text that they provided. But in addition, there's a very interesting set of things that start to come forward from this. If you look in detail at the map, consider what we can learn from a detailed examination of this. If we blow up portions of the map, which you can do in that zoomify technology, you can see, among other things, that there's a garden right here. Then there's a forge and a bakehouse. Then there's huts of the Bambaras, projected. Again, they probably don't exist yet, but they are projected to exist. They are planned for. Huts of the Bambaras. Okay, who are the Bambaras? Well, that'd be a question that we ought to start asking, and probably could find out with the help of local scholars very quickly in Senegal who know about the source of the Bambaras. The forge and the bakehouse are very interesting because both of those require a lot of fuel, and fuel at this point was wood, and there's not much wood on this island. That wood had to be imported. The garden's fascinating as well. Why would they have a garden on an island? Well, in part because they're providing for the slave ships that are coming through. And they need to, as it were, sell food for those going across the Atlantic. Another aspect of this can be looked at in detail up here. Take a look at the way that's indicated. These are huts for ye free Negroes on this map. Huts for ye free Negroes. Okay. Who are they? Why are they free if others are being sold into slavery? Are they to work on the gardens? Are they free in any real sense if they're on an island under the control of those in charge of the slave trade? Well, all of these questions have become very interesting, especially when they indicate where the burying place is. Archaeologists nowadays might want to consult some of these historical maps to see what's going on. Another historical initiative is, in the digital age, known as the African Graphics Archives. The African Historical Graphics Archive focuses in a different way on images from Africa. They're interested in historical maps, but the scope of this project is different in some respects from Afroterra because it preserves, digitizes, and analyzes published images of Africa beyond the maps alone. Images from Africa were part of the travel literature and the encyclopedias that were being published in Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, and they have detailed images either of forts along the coast, as in this case, or of forts on rivers, as in this case over here. Those can be studied in detail. Images like this one of the Dix Cove Fort on the Gold Coast contain very informative printed text with them about things, including details of what's in the gardens, and referred to here on the print as fruits, roots, and salads. The print itself provides an indication that that's a good place to stop, as they say down here, for fruits, roots, and salads. In other words, fresh produce to keep alive both the slaves and the crew as they make their way across the Atlantic. Still, other documents are of importance because of the New World crops introduced to Africa. This one contains an indication of Indian corn, as it's referred to. Indian corn is grown here, again, in part, on a plantation scale to supply the export crop needed for the slave trade. Still, other crops are introduced, like manioc, but manioc is poisonous if eaten straight. Its outer shell, its bark, It grows underground as a root, and its outer skin is quite sickening if eaten straight. It has to be ground down, leached out. The chemical in that outer shell is leached out of a wet meal, and then that's dried under pressure and baked into little cakes and the like. So there's a real process involved in this. The American Indians knew about it, but the question is, who introduced that to Africa, and why? Well, one of the reasons why was that the slaves, to be brought to the New World, had to learn to live on New World crops. Other documents, which aren't maps, are very important for the discussion of the castles themselves, their different attributes, their control under different European powers. And again, digital technology can allow for the zooming in of this material and calling it up over the the internet in a way that would have been difficult, in fact impossible, prior to the current technology. So it's really quite interesting to look at that in detail, because the material is providing information on a scale we've never been able to see before. And it's important to share that kind of information with people who are doing scholarly work on this from different parts of the world. It's not just in the United States, but all of the castles involved, including castles in this case from Denmark, France, Holland. Well, at this scale you can't see very much, but you can in fact expand the scale and share this digitally now, so that let's take it up to about 25% to see what in fact we're looking at here. You can see the detail involved there and the description of each one of these castles. In this case it's provided in French, but the translations are easy enough, and you can see what's involved in each one of the castles. In this case a Dutch castle, in this case an English castle, and all of them are vital for understanding different aspects of the slave trade. This is the kind of thing that emerged here in the Christiansborg Castle in the current area of Accra, which is now in Ghana, and was referred to then as the Gold Coast. Well, this kind of information is crucial for an understanding of the slave trade, and zooming digital technology makes it possible. It's also possible to lay in maps from the period over current circumstances and then go looking inside the various areas that are shown up on these maps for clues of the history. This kind of history in the digital age has been significantly advanced by Harvard's History Design Studio. It's known as HDS at Harvard, History Design Studio. It's under the direction of Professor Vincent Brown and two very capable and talented assistants, Amy Alamu and Robin McDowell. They deserve a lot of credit and a lot of thanks for the ways in which they've developed history in the digital age. New technologies, new data, new insights, and, of course, new questions. The new questions come from being able to analyze the historical past with greater precision. The work of the history in the digital age has been contributed and contributes fantastically to a new kind of citizen science alliance that's emerging around the world.